elevation, and we use that to provide guidance. So that's something that we can technically do, you know, being able to actually come up and say, if we remove it, what do we get? We can not only just look at it from flow coming from the west branch from north to south, we also could look at it if we were to move it from Steel Brook. Does that help us anyway? Because if we lower the channel bed down here, do we get any impacts upstream? So that's something we can look at too, just through modeling exercise. And then we can see how much benefit we get from that, and then we'll look at the cost of construction and the permitting and all that kind of stuff. And you know, when we make these decisions as we go through this process, part of the prioritization approach are discussions of like how technically feasible something is, financially feasible, and also permitting challenges. Because if we do that activity, it's called, like some people call it dredging, and it's not very favorable looked at by the regulatory agencies if we don't have some kind of justification. So if we can show that, you know, if removing this drops flow 4 feet, well then, you know, it's a public safety thing. So yeah, we have some leverage there. So we look at all that in the prioritization process. So if this is an alternative that comes forward and actually say we get a good bang for a buck on it, then we identify that the permitting agencies may be a challenge, but we get a good public safety benefit of it. So something we can totally look at.
And our program's developed that before with selective gravel removal on Long Hollow, things like that. That is in place. We actually get it permitted. That's not a problem. It's the challenge is you have to put the engineering behind it first, and then second of all, how do you not have it as a reoccurring maintenance item that somebody has to deal with? So there definitely are ways you can look at those.
In the past, the town took it out.
Right. Crushed it.
Used the gravel.
Yep.
They used to have Bert Clark come in, so help yourself, Bert, let's get it out of there. And that's the way they handled it before. Not any great permits, it's just common sense. So we gotta get that common sense, fellas. Because if we have a hurricane here and it gives us 8 inches of rain, we'll all be sweating. But so let's do this. We look at what we can do now. You don't have to wait, and paper doesn't let it keep us dry. We got to take action.
Right. Well, and this is, you know, we're moving this forward, and that's something that we can do really quickly for that, and just to show the benefits and the drawbacks to that. So that was something we'll do with the Flood Commission's blessing, and we can pick up the information to do that.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, well, it's funny you bring up the term paper, and we go back to this special flood hazard area, and that's a piece of paper. It's a map. Well, usually it's digitally now, but it's a map that really governs people's lives because it tells banks and future home buyers that if this particular house is located in a flood zone or not. And in this, the special flood hazard area maps were just confirmed or become effective this year, this June. So this is now official, very recently off the press. And so in this exhibit here, what you see is an aerial photo of Delhi, and it's really faint. You may be able to see it in the hard copies, but there's this hatch line in here. And anything located, there's no hatch here, there's hatch here. Anything located in the hatch is in the special flood hazard area. Now there's different zones in the special flood area, zone AO, zone AE, and that affects insurance premiums because it's a projection of how deep the water may get on a home. But long story short, you know, everything you see this push pin here or a flag is within that special flood hazard zone, so insurance premiums, everything we've talked about. What we do as modelers as part of this exercise is this technical evaluation of all the assumptions that were used to develop things that could influence your community in terms of flood hazards. One of the things that popped out to us was the way that this special flood hazard area was mapped. And one of the known limitations of the common way to develop these maps is that it's done in one direction. So it's just longitudinally, that's how water surface elevations are calculated in that direction. Well, sometimes water likes to go in multiple directions, as we know. And what we saw in this exercise is this, on this yellow map, that's a profile cut. You can see this is a high point here, and it goes downstream. The red line, same thing. My blue line is Elm Street, so that goes down there. So that's a cut of Steel Brook, and it goes down that way. So in the mapping exercise of when this was done, these maps were developed, the modelers saw that the Elm Creek, at Elm Street, the creek popped out and went in the water, went someplace. Well, they had to account for that. So they had to make an assumption that as the water came down Steel Brook, it hit Elm Street Bridge and made an abrupt face turn and then went right down Elm Street as you head down towards Kingston. And that's just the natural limitations of the model. They had to make that assumption and had to put blinders on that it actually not just went this way, but went that way and potentially that way. And that's what we call two-dimensionally modeling. So there was a limitation in what they did. They didn't do anything wrong, but that was the best assumption that they made. But that assumption then puts a lot of these homes along Elm Street within the map. So one of these mitigation strategies that we're proposing, this SB Steelbrook PA, which is programmatic, is a further study of, well, what happens if we were to look at this in a two-dimensional model? Would this actually start shrinking the special flood hazard zone and homes just start popping out of the map just by modeling exercise only, not even have to build anything? But these, what's that's called is a LOMAR, a letter of map revision, and that's something that's community driven. Underneath the LFA process, we can go to the points and say, hey, community, look at this. You know, we saw this on our review. We don't think anything was done wrong. It was just a natural assumption. But if the community wants to go down a different avenue to looking at modeling this in a different way, you know, this is where we go with the LFA process. So that's one thing that the Flood Commission suggested we do, is we take this to this suggestion to say the community may want to pick this up now and look at hydraulic modeling, what that may do for flood flows, and maybe we'll actually shrink this area around Elm Street to get some homes out of the special flood hazard area. Okay, so this is this laundry list, as we talked about before, of everything that we've gone through, and some of them we've talked about tonight. Other things that we didn't because we weren't technically feasible. But what we like to do in this LFA process is to leave a paper trail. So if in 10 years from now, someone finds me on the internet and says, hey, why don't you look at this? I can always go back and say, hey, yeah, we did look at this, but at this particular flood commission meeting, we said we're not going to do it anymore because we're not going to build a 40-foot tall dam up at the drinking water reservoir. So we want to leave just kind of a paper trail, decision trail as we go through all this. And here, these are the bold strategies that where we are now. They're pending, meaning that the Flood Commission has thought they were a good idea. We're going to allow the board some time to think about them over the next couple of weeks. And then once we get to that point of either pending or moving forward, then we'll start putting together what's called a benefit to cost analysis. We'll develop a conceptual cost to actually implement these strategies, and what is the quantifiable benefit from it. That's part of our LFA exercises to do that. And then we talked about a couple things. The gravel bar buildup at Steelbrook, Woolerton. We'll circle back around on those and add those in there and see what we can do at those. And we'll talk with the Flood Commission about that. And those will get up on this list too. Any other questions at Steelbrook?
Question, looking at it, you're talking about, you know, building debris basins as a possibility. But if we had been inundated with a large amount of rain all at once, there's going to be current. So if the basin is wide, isn't the current going to still go down, carry everything regardless of how wide the basin is?
The basin, these flood debris basins, sediment traps, log debris traps, what they're designed to do is that, I can go right back here, I can kind of talk to it. So you have water, it's pretty tight, screaming down through here, it gets into tighter valleys, and it gets into this wide open area here. And when water moves from a narrow spot to a wider spot, it slows down. And what we're trying to do when that slows down, when that process happens, then a lot of the gravels and the cobbles that it's carrying are going to fall out into that place. Now, granted, that volume is going to fill up, so it has to be maintained. But during your big thunderstorms, you get 4 or 5 inches of rain, you'll get the debris that are captured within this basin, and then you can go in and harvest it afterwards and reset it back to the normal. The other part is the things that are floating down. They're trees and such. And the flood debris basins are basically, you can almost think of them as like fingers pointing upstream, and there's infrastructure within the basins that allow water to pass through, but they're strainers, and they'll help capture logs and other big things that are up in there. And then again, those, it's gonna have to be maintained, and those are things that we talk about in, you know, things to think about. If we're like removing gravel bar down here, it's gonna has to be done in perpetuity. If we put things up here, it's gonna have to be done in perpetuity until we can shut the source off at these eroding banks. So those are things that we also.
So those fingers, you call them whatever, still have to be in the channel, because that's where everything's gonna go down. When, you know, we have a flood on the main west bank,
Mhm.
all right? Yes, you know, Page Avenue and all the side streets may get flood, but the channel and the debris mainly still goes down the river channel.
Right.
So I'm just wondering, you know, you have basins, I just see the main current still taking everything down the main channel. The basin is gonna take the additional water, let's say. But if you've got any current, it's still going down and hitting the bridges.
And that's why when the basins are wide, that current starts to drop out, because you go from this neck down place into a wider thing, so your velocity, your speed of water slow down.
But even that narrowness that you're talking with your red line, it's such steep banks that how would you widen anything there? You're taking mountains out.
Well, that's why
So-
it would be located at these two places. This is the natural occurring widen out area at this abandoned drinking water reservoir.
Mhm.
And here, this historic dam site, where it is one of those bottlenecks, and then it just opens
Yeah.
up. It goes from like 100 feet wide to like 500 feet wide for some weird reason, but that's probably why they put the dam in there, to be able to get some water through there. So that's where those would be located, just to slow the water down, have the sediment drop out, have these strainers in there to catch. It's not going to be 100%, it's not going to catch everything, but it's going to knock it a lot down.
So maybe scientifically it works, I just don't see putting basins in is gonna stop the current and the debris from going down to the bridges.
Okay. I can get you your contact info. I can send you some stuff that we've done in the Pacific Northwest and other things where we do these strainers things, but
No, I understand it might work on paper, but
I'll send you photos. And this is,
if it's gonna move, it's gonna move.
I mean, our number one priority is if we can actually address the slopes themselves, that's where you get your best bang
That's
for
where
the
your
buck.
stream bank remediation comes in.
yeah, it's a combination of efforts through there. Okay, so Meredith Street. So Meredith Street is highway, it comes in right into town through here. This is Main Street that goes through here, Highway 10, and 28 that goes up through here. So what we were tasked with to look at quantify the existing flooding problems on Meredith Street and then come up with some potential mitigation solutions. So the way that we approached this is that we looked at the three main drainage areas that are going into the Meredith Street stormwater system. So in the exhibit here on the right, you have this line, which is basically either underground pipe, underground channel, or pipes. And these blue lines are catch basins where flow can get into it, or we kind of see or there's a transition between the systems. And then the figure on the left shows the amount of drainage area flowing down into particular points of interest. So POI 2 is right here, cutback. POI 3 is right here. There's a large retaining wall right up by this curve where it pops out. And then POI 4 is right down where High Street is, where we have another flooding hazard on these homes right up through here. So we went out and got data of the existing system, and we started seeing that things start to overflow at about a 10-year event at the cutback, where we start seeing some overtopping of water at flood events 10 years and greater. Now down here at this POI 2, or POI 3, where that retaining wall was, happens at a 2-year rainfall event. Now this is assuming that there's no basketballs or any kind of debris that's plugged up the pipes. This is a free-flowing assumption here. But at a relatively frequent flood event, that's when you start seeing flooding coming out of that area right there and damaging the homes and causing some erosion problems through here. Again, like this could be happening 4 times a year, but that may tell us that the system somewhere along the way is plugged. And then down at POI 4, we see between a 2 and a 5-year event where we start seeing ponding and flooding happening in these areas. And then down at the DOT network, downstream, starting downstream of High Street here, manholes start blowing out somewhere between the 10 and the 25-year event. Now that's pretty typical design standards for DOT. They do a 10-year design standard for their highways for stormwater conveyance. And we asked the Flood Commission in our last meeting, is that what we want to shoot for? Because that's what that can take. Because if we open this all up and be able to pass all this water down through here, now we shoot all this water down through here, and then we start blowing out manhole covers maybe at a more frequent event, which may be fun for the kids to play in, but pretty hard for your DPW people to be out there. So what we did is we ran with that and said, okay, well, what can we do to get it at a 10-year design storm? So as a combination of increased detention, which is kind of a green infrastructure practice, there's not a lot of concrete or anything involved, we're just digging and cutting. And then in a combination of following this existing alignment. So this is the Meredith Street 3A mitigation alternative, where we're just increasing the conveyance along the existing alignment. And we're increasing the pipe size all the way down through and tying back into the DOT network down there. We're removing anything that is insufficient and just putting in a larger pipe or the equivalent of an open channel if we have room to put it in. So that's basically what it is. And so now we can pass a 10-year storm throughout the entire area, and that's it. And that's a 1 in 10-year chance of it flooding, open channel flow. The other alternative we looked at, which we thought that may be less invasive, is actually taking a lot of the water out offline from coming from the drainage area up through here, and actually running it down Meredith Street. So then we would, we'd be digging up one lane of the highway, putting in a new infrastructure all the way down to about where High Street runs into it. We still have to do a little bit of enhancement down in here, but we wouldn't have as much impact to the backyards and homes all the way up through this area. And that's again another alternative, 3B, that passes the 10-year event. Now we're gonna move both of them forward in tandem to kind of look at the cost benefit of both of those, and then from whatever the cost benefit is, then the preferred one would pop out. But then it gets to the board and to the Flood Commission, is a 1 in 10 chance of flooding a good enough answer? And this is what this exercise is that there is the common design standards, but the common design standards may cause flooding to people, and maybe we want to look at a bigger flood event, so 1 in 50-year event or 1 in 100-year event, and realize that is going to change how we approach things. So if we want to say we can't tolerate flooding, only we want a 1 in 50 chance of flooding happening, we're going to have to start looking at putting in another trunk line along Meredith Street and working parallel with the existing system so we can handle all this water and move it down through. So that's something we need a little bit of guidance back from community, because I can probably guarantee you that these ones here are going to have marginal cost benefit, meaning like the costs are probably going to exceed the benefits, if we look at it dollar for dollar, but we're not just all dollar oriented people. We have lives here, homes here, so maybe the community will want to move one of those forward despite the benefit cost. And I can guarantee this one is going to be, that benefit cost is going to be even bigger because we're going to be putting in a lot more infrastructure through there. But this is the forum to make those kind of educated decisions about which way we want to go. So over the next couple of weeks, we'll ping the boards again to see if what kind of feedback we want to go on, if we just want to even take a look at doing a 1 in 50 or 1 in 100 year event.
That orange blob up there looks like a kidney is a retention pond essentially in that low area. Is that what you?
That's my kidney stone.
So that's your kidney, right? And then the
yeah.
point is,
It's a detention area, yeah. The purpose is just to retain some of the water to knock down the peak discharges that are coming out of this drainage area. We figured that working in tandem with that, plus the infrastructure improvements, will get everything down through a 10-year storm.
so with the goal that orange area is privately owned property, making a designated detention pond, would take it out of private ownership, or would forestall building there, obviously.
Isn't that already wetlands?
It's pretty wet right through
It's
there.
already, I don't think it's a
I don't think
local
it's
spot.
designated.
It's not designated,
It's
but
not
it's,
designated,
but it's pretty much wet all the time.
So
In
it's
that
already,
area.
you're saying it's already off
Yeah, you know, right after cutting back on the
I know where we're
right,
on
yeah,
it.
that area is pretty much wet all year long, so it'd be hard to build on, so.
Well, I guess I'm hoping that the CEO hears that.
And so in the LFA process, we'll call those things out, like these improvements have to traverse, 13 private parcels, and permanent and temporary easements are gonna be needed. We'll talk about relocation strategies, and we usually in that process, we'll go that far. And then from there, if the community wants to run with a particular idea, then they go through and make these executive decisions about private partnerships.
Have you talked to DOT at all in your communications about that?
Yeah, they actually gave us some plans, which we're pretty psyched
Well,
about.
it's been in the works for supposedly stormwater for years, and then, I guess it was maybe 4 years ago, they said Meredith Street is totally off their drawing boards. So I just didn't know in your conversations, did they have any thought to when they might add it back in?
Yeah, no, they didn't seem to be on our communications on their radar. We were just happy to get, plans from when they did that over at Main Street, Meredith Street there. And it's all designed, at least that system is all designed to their standards, so.
I was just wondering, since we're going through this process, that in communicating with Binghamton, that they would say, well, we're projecting, it's in our 5-year projection, it's in our 10-year projection to readdress the stormwater on that street, because it was on the drawing board.
I think through this process, these gentlemen will be able to give you all the ammo you need to take that as a municipality to them and say, hey, this is what the findings are, and this is why it needs to be changed.
Well, they admit it's an issue, but they also admit probably 80% is on private property. So they're not in any rush. That's all, Pretty much where it crosses over Meredith Street from one side to the other side, they admit that that's their jurisdiction, and physically at the bottom of High Street to the river is their jurisdiction. But on all the homeowners, it's their property, and therefore the state won't do anything. Because it's out of their right of way, they only got, 35 feet from the center line, and they won't admit to it. Even though maybe they've done it in the past. But rules have changed in the state and everybody's jurisdiction that you don't work on private property any longer.
Well, Meredith Street gets affected by 2 ways besides upper, because if you get a good rain
Well, you get a
on
rain
High Street,
on the mountain, you get Spruce Street. A lot of the water comes down Spruce Street, which dumps into the open trench on that brook.
Yep.
right above.
That's
I mean,
what-
it drain pitches are pretty good there, yeary sometimes. But that, when it rains good, coming down off High Street, because of the way it's ditched, it goes out, around, and that's where majority of the time, and I mean, it doesn't even touch the state thing, so, I mean, Meredith Street, there's really 2 concerns there, why you're getting water at Main Street still.
So it's just, obviously, it was built in the 30s with the CWC or whatever Roosevelt agency was doing at the time, but basically a 2x2 2-foot box, except where people put other tubes in and stuff.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely a Frankenstein network all the way through there. That's why we have the problems we have.
I've had several of the old timers tell me on one of the places on Meredith Street, they took the old smokestack from the creamery, and that's what the state put in. And that's what's in. And ironically, that property was a DOT worker.
So this is, that we'll move forward on that, to the benefit cost analysis, and we'll get some feedback from the boards on whether we want to look at a bigger design standard for that. All right, so West Branch, now this is, we're gonna go through a bunch of iterations here, it's a big area. And a lot of it's cumulative, So we start in the downstream area and we work our way up. So this is an overview of the entire West Branch area that we looked at. You can see all the push bins and the flags. Those are homes and businesses within the special flood hazard area. And the color coding shows what the water depth is during a 100-year flood. So deeper the water is the dark purple, which is you can kind of see right along the channel there. It's greater than 6 feet. The more the shallower, lighter blues, right on your fringes, that's between 0 and 1 feet of water depth during the 100-year flood. This is the governing flood. And so now, just orientate yourself. This is Steel Brook coming down through here. That's the Price Chopper Plaza, Kingston Bridge, and Bridge Street. So our approach is that we're going to start from the downstream up, because downstream usually what is the main driver that influences things upstream, like the obstruction that we talked about before. If we remove that, maybe we'll lower upstream water surface elevations by doing that. So we went through, the first step to identify these areas is we went, well, where are our big areas of interest? Like, where are most of our hazards happening? What is important from the community? And we went back and forth with the Flood Commission on this. So we used that information plus the location of a lot of the high concentration of buildings in the special flood hazard area to identify these particular points of interest, where as we go through these iterations, we looked at what's the change in water surface elevation pre-intervention and compared that to post-water surface elevation intervention. So again, just to kind of orientate yourselves, Price Chopper, this is SUNY Ball Fields, Depot Street area, Steel Brook, and Main Street running up through here. So what we did is we developed what's called a terrace and floodplain terrain map, or TAF for short, since we're talking about old residents. And what the TAF map does is it really allows us to identify floodplain features that pop out, that are unusual. And how do I find that? Well, so here in this legend, areas that are deep purple are terrain that's really close to the average water surface elevation. So this is either the water itself or stuff that's really, really close to it. Then you start getting into lighter shades of purple, and that's topographic areas that will flood frequently. So it won't take a lot of rise in the water surface elevation to spread across that lighter area of purple. And then you start moving into the shades of orange, darker orange, and then brown. And the brown stuff is really separated from your average water surface elevation. And those browns and dark oranges really help us identify where there might be locations of floodplain fill that may have happened some time ago that may be acting as these obstacles of what we talked about before. And so when we go through, this is where we started with our mitigation features of looking at what can we manipulate to lower water surface elevations. Because when we went through the exercise of can we reduce the amount of water coming into our area, well, no, that would take a massive dam, and that's not just viable at all. And other strategies like increasing wetlands wouldn't put a dent in our flow. So we're now at that third tier of site-specific interventions, which is a floodplain manipulation. Let's see if we can remove some of these fill areas, open up the floodplains, lower water surface elevations potentially. So that's where we described right through here. So that's why we looked at targeting areas of removing things. So this is a map of suspected fill areas that maybe historically have been filled in that may now be causing our today's flooding problems. I also just like to talk to the board about this particular map, and when we go through this exercise, think about, well, this is what's happened previously, and should that influence, and then we can see what actually the historic activities have done to our today's flooding problems. So we should think about, well, what are our today's activities, and how that may impact our future flooding problems. So if we start filling in more of this floodplain and creating more of these obstacles, are we exacerbating our flooding problems in the future? So this is kind of a tool to help guide that process. Do we have to really think about strengthening our floodplain development ordinances because we don't want more future flooding problems? So our first intervention was the low-hanging fruit. There is a berm here. So this is the Delaware River. Again, the hatched area is that special flood hazard area. The water depth map we just talked about. And where you don't see any color is where the 100-year flood doesn't get into. So it's very high up out of the water surface elevation. So here you can see these features. The red line starts upstream, moves downstream. You can see the hump. Blue line, same thing. There's another hump. So that right there is some kind of fill, a man-made fill that's happened sometime in the past. So what we do is we identify that, and we're going to propose to move that fill out of the way, and then to calculate what are our benefits. Well, this is a table here, and so you can see the different points of interest as we talked about before, 1 through 5.